Is it good? The light is good? Yeah?
I hear my sister's coming and Stefan are both coming tomorrow.
I know, all your people. We made sure that you're not lonely.
Yeah, thank you.
By the way, I have to look at the seating arrangement today. What a nightmare.
The sleeping arrangement?
Seating.
Seating arrangements. Sleeping arrangements would be more interesting.
I agree. You didn't know about this.
How many years have you been doing this?
Well, we've done it in New York, historically. But
It's
now,
the first year in LA?
yeah.
Fun.
So we'll see. We have no idea if it'll work.
And what anniversary is this
I think
the prize? Sixth?
Sixth.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, their first question was, are there enough philosophers to give this prize to every year that are really worthy of it? Why don't we just dive right in?
okay, but hold on. Put your shoes on first. Shoes first.
Let's keep a modicum of dignity here
Shoes.
before it falls apart. I like it to.
And then how?
It's kind of like a Buñuel
because
film.
I have to do this silly, placement business.
Mm-hmm. How much time do I have with you?
Yeah, how much? That's what I'm asking you.
I mean, the more, the happier I am. So you tell me.
No, but what time is it now? Do you know?
We're very punctual. What time is it?
2:39.
So we're 9 minutes past schedule. Hurry, speak.
Okay. No, maybe. Okay.
What do you think? What time would you like to stop?
Like, huh? Maybe we get tired of each other.
Yeah, I doubt it, but
No, I'm convinced. Yes.
you're convinced we will get tired of each other?
Yeah, there we go.
Our first disagreement.
Many. Okay. No, I don't know. An hour? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's plenty.
Yeah, that's
I
what I
think
thought.
that's plenty.
Okay.
Yeah. Even 45 minutes. But no, we're shooting, so it's all good. But we share a love of philosophy. This is how we met. And I think particularly of how philosophy actually applies to real life, right? To political issues, to how to live a more meaningful life. And I've been fascinated reading about your youth and your initial kind of approaches to philosophy and particularly to political philosophy. And I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about your kind of rebellious youth, as I've seen it defined, and how that shaped your philosophical thinking.
Well, many questions in one question.
Yeah.
Maybe I should start with the non-personal one, just an opinion. Philosophy seems very abstract, and in theory it is, but it's also very real. And philosophy, I think, allows you to think about life issues, important issues, the most important issues, in a way that's sort of transcends a little bit daily reality and your own reality, but then brings it back to your reality and daily reality. And I think that's the beauty of philosophy. And in a world today where cultures are really tearing apart from each other, and where within cultures there's huge divisions as well, I think philosophy is maybe more important than ever, because it allows, again, to transcend the fights or the ideologies and to think about something bigger, something longer term, and the implications of what's happening, meaning political actions, cultural actions, and in today's world, equally technology. So all of these things are so relevant, and being able to look at them philosophically, I think gives you a little bit of distance, gives you sometimes hope, and makes you maybe, hopefully, a better spectator and better actor as a human, because we're all involved in what's happening, not just in our own lives, but beyond us. So I think philosophy is always maybe important and maybe always useful. But I think in today's world, which is a world that's fractured and fracturing even more, I think it's more important today than maybe it was 10 years ago. So, going back to the original question, other youth, I was just a troubled youth. So it wasn't any of these deep and important sort of questions of society and of where the world is going. It was just my own quest for answers and for what life could bring. And I just found philosophers and thinkers very interesting. So I couldn't get enough of trying to understand and read. And I just, at that time, had the time to do it, was inclined to do it. I lived in Paris, which is a place that's always loved thinkers and philosophers. So it was actually, in some ways, quite natural, but I was just fascinated. So I was lucky to start that way, and maybe unlucky because it hasn't left me.
But and so I understand you were interested in Sartre and in Marx. Is that correct?
Yes. So
can you speak a little bit about how they might have influenced you early on?
Well, so Sartre is, a prominent figure in what is called existentialism, which is really sort of life as an existence, life as, being lived, meaning your actions and what you do, in essence, is what you are. And that still resonates with me very profoundly today. I think, taking a little bit of distance from the idea that everything is about the individual, I think, luckily, I've been able to look at other ideas or other traditions, mostly Eastern, where not everything is on your shoulders and not everything is about you, meaning it's about everything around you, the community, the world at large. And I think that's in some ways liberating and also more humanizing. But when you're a teenager and you're somewhat rebellious and you are very excited and very interested in ideas, it's all about who are you, what are your actions going to be, how do you feel about others, and existentialism I found just, and I still find a great way to sort of look at yourself in the mirror and seeing who are you, who do you want to be, who can you be, etc. And so I found it fascinating then, still fascinating today. Karl Marx, very interesting to me then because I was rebellious. Still interesting because he tried to make sense of things at a system level, an entire society. And I think the ambition is incredible. I think it's very valuable. But I also think that it has limitations. I think it's quite damning for humans.
In what way?
Sort of say that we are all just part of a system, which we are in truth, but treat us that way, and for good and for bad, sort of impose a similar treatment to most of us. So good in the sense that it may make society function better, but not good in the sense that it really takes away from the individual and from humanity.
But were you, when you say you were rebellious, were you reacting to like sensitivity or perceived injustice in the world? I mean, I heard that you didn't want to learn English because you thought it was the language of imperialism, and I'm just wondering if that rebellion was rooted in wanting to change something that you saw as wrong in the world already early on.
So, looking around, especially if you're curious, you see that, things could be better, that there's injustice in many different ways. And I felt there was injustice in many different ways. And I felt, because of it, the system wasn't fair, wasn't working. And especially when you are young and passionate, you want everything to be right and everything to be exactly as it could be or should be. So you become quite extreme. I think with time, and maybe that's, sort of giving in a way. But with time, you become more realistic and you become more accepting about what's happening in the world. And but I think it's healthy at some point in your life to want to fight for almost everything. And I wanted to fight for the dignity of every individual, the rights, the potential for every individual, and any one individual who would be treated unfairly or who wouldn't be at the same level as a human as others, I felt was an injustice. And I think it's very noble. I also think, and therefore I think as a principle, I think it's a wonderful principle, but is it a way, is it a realistic way for society to function? It isn't. So the
what
question,
isn't? Rebelling against the systems?
No. The fact that every human should be treated or can be treated in exactly the same way. I think that every individual can be respected and should be given the same capabilities as one another, but the outcomes will never be the same. So, because we are different, and we have to respect the fact that there is no perfection, and that we will have very different and uneven outcomes between us as individuals. What I still think today is give every person, every human, at least a reasonable starting point. So there should be minimums, there should be protections, there should be a way forward.
Right. I don't want to get to today yet. I want to keep diving into your roots a little bit, because you went from rebellious youth to becoming very good within this system, I imagine, at functioning, not only functioning, but being highly successful within it. To what kind of do you give credit to that process unfolding in your life? Was it, is it luck? Is it intelligence? Is it a way of gaming the system? Is it a way of taking full advantage of the system? Can you talk a little bit about your ability? How did it manifest to do so well financially and otherwise? Before we get to this, coming back to philosophy, it seems like you're back to where you started in some sense, in the sense of having your life be more guided by philosophy and principles. But there seemed to have been a big detour there, right, that allows you to do what you do now. And I'm wondering how you entered that, and what philosophy did you have to kind of let go of, and what did you have to embrace in order to be so successful within that?
So, one of the lessons sometimes, and I don't think it's a good lesson necessarily, because it's not applicable to everyone, but sometimes you sort of start somewhere and then you go around the world searching, and you realize that your original instinct or your original wish was maybe the right instinct. So that's where I am today. But at that time, yes, I felt that the system wasn't necessarily fair. But as opposed to saying, all right, I'm going to fight the system, I took almost the opposite approach. It's a little bit like if you think a game is not right, as opposed to saying, okay, I'm not going to play the game, I felt, well, let's see if I can learn the game, understand the game, and by understanding and being in the game, maybe I'll have not only a better sense of the game, but then I can help the game or make potentially the game or the experience better. And that's the approach I took. So as opposed to saying, all right, I am not happy with reality, let's actually plunge into the water, learn how it works, learn from it, and by being in the system, maybe ultimately I can reform or help think through new ideas about the system. And it's a really strange way of doing things. In some ways, it makes no sense, because if you have something that you'd like to address, why not just address it? And in some ways, I regret that I didn't, because it would have been a different career and would have been maybe a better and more interesting career. I made the choice of trying to understand and learn and embrace what I was skeptical about, to understand it better and to deal with it, as opposed to not. And doing it today, meaning sort of taking a step back and trying to have an effect, hopefully, on what I was interested in, on the system itself, by being in a position like this today, I think is helpful. On the other hand, maybe all these decades that I spent in the system would have been better spent trying to think about the system and trying to see if there would be ideas to make the system a better system.
But I'd love for you to dig a little deeper into what allowed you to have the system work so much to your advantage. Do you think that's luck? Do you think it's a certain position that you were born into? Do you think it's, I guess fundamentally, do you believe that you were there was some sort of meritocracy in place that allowed you to get to where you were?
Well, I think that in this case, what I did, I was interested in the world of ideas. I wanted to become a writer. I wanted to change the world, and then I decided, okay, let's deal with the real world first. And the real world, in this case for me, was simply I became a participant in the world of investments and finance. Sort of became like a gnome, in the system. And I didn't think it was very difficult, very complicated. I just thought that it's a little bit like, I compared it to a game. Once you learn the game, if you spend, at least I felt that way, a little bit of time at it, you could get reasonably good at it. It didn't require that much brilliance. I think it requires much more discipline, more imagination to be a great writer, to be a great philosopher, to be an investor is almost like being a reasonable processor. But it doesn't require, or I didn't feel required that much skill.
Does it require like moral compromise? I mean, there's a lot of kind of vilification of people who have made a lot of money, and I'm curious from within whether it felt like you had to kind of sacrifice a lot of, or any ideals. Is it a zero-sum game where like you feel like you're winning at the expense of other people, or do you feel like it's like, again, taking advantage of the system in a way that is, builds wealth?
Well, once you, in a game or play the game, you play by the rules of the game, and no game is perfect. And I would say almost the opposite. Most games are imperfect, and the rules are not necessarily right or fair. And there's no question, once you are playing the game, you compromise, no question. And that's part of entering a game, being a player in the game, because you have to accept the rules, and it's competitive. And if you want to stay in the game, you've got to defend yourself, and play within the game. So I would say, yes, you do compromise, and I think anything in life has a lot. When you become a participant in any game of society, and in my case it was investments, but it could have been a different game or a different aspect of society. Well, you accept the rules. You're part of that game. Is it entirely fair? Is it just? Definitely not.
And so like, it's just interesting to, hear about your roots in, a philosophy that's very much interested in like addressing inequality, and then finding yourself, in a world in which that inequality is most manifest in a way, if that makes sense. And I'm just wondering like what that felt like as you were doing so well in the game, like did those roots in that philosophy continue to kind of, did you continue a dialogue with it in your own mind even, or did you just decide to set that aside in order to keep succeeding at the game?
Well, it's a total paradox, and I think that when you, in my case, when I shifted from very idealistic to, let's say, realistic, I no doubt made a compromise and shifted gears, and in some ways, and today, regrettably, to some extent, I put, part of my life and my soul aside. But I also gained a lot. What I gained is experience. I gained an understanding, I think, of the world, the way it functions, and of cultures. So what I gained, I think, at the end is, I hope, helpful in addressing the first questions. For example, you mentioned, inequality. If I was just an observer from the outside, I would have maybe thought of how to deal with inequality in too simple a way, which is, all right, deal with inequality by, giving everybody, or forcing the system to give everyone a fair share of everything. How do you do it? You redistribute. You take from the ones who have and give to the ones who have less. Well, that's the normal way of doing things. That's taxes. It's reasonably effective and fair, but my feeling is there are better ways of doing it. And part of what we do at the Institute is think about these things. So we have this idea of pre-distribution as opposed to redistribution.
Pre-distribution, did you say?
Yes.
Okay.
And the idea of pre-distribution is to give everybody a stake in the economic pie from the beginning. And today, I think there are ways of doing it. We call it universal basic capital. But you could, in essence, society, especially rich societies that are very productive, like the US or like California, can allow new wealth, or the creation of wealth, to be shared from the beginning. So you could set aside a share of all the productivity. In this case, it's talent married with capital. So new companies, for example, you could take a share of all new companies and put them, contribute them to a sovereign wealth fund for all citizens, in the case of the US or in the case of California, without hurting the productivity of the enterprises, but making everyone a beneficiary of the economic development and empower everyone economically as individuals. So there's a way of doing it which actually makes everybody a capitalist, even though the idea is a socialist idea. So you can marry different concepts. And I would have never thought about these things from the outside. By being inside the system, you, I think, understand it better, and you can come up with more creative ways to actually build something that is going to be useful. Because being an idealist is wonderful, but that's all you are. You're an idealist, and life it has to be grounded also for most people in reality.
But there aren't just idealists. There's also people who fight for social justice in a very hands-on way. You seem to be like pitting like idealism versus the realism, and the realism has to be within like the system, and the idealists are the ones who are thinking about how things could be. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who are fighting for what could be in very real ways, right?
And I think that's important and healthy. And the question is, how do they get there? If they get there simply from a wish or an instinct, that's fine. But I think they're going to be more valuable if they get there from experience, from having lived. And I think then their contribution is going to be more meaningful, more real, more valuable. And so if you're fighting for social justice, let's say, do you do it because you've thought about it, you've come up with experiences that make your fight legitimate, or is it just a wish? So I think that having had the experience of why, I think has value. And therefore I think the experience of having lived through certain things is useful.
Yeah.
Even in social justice. But I think it's so important that, yes, people fight for it, but I think that it's better if you fight for it if you have the experience of having helped you understand what you're fighting for, how you're fighting for it. Because fighting sometimes, just for the sake of fighting, is actually destructive as opposed to constructive. Yeah. And when I was an idealist and maybe ready to become a fighter, an activist in some ways, I'm not sure I would have been constructive. There's a fine line between an activist and an anarchist. And an anarchist is a beautiful thing in theory. It's sort of an idealistic way of sort of being in some ways, but it's very destructive. So the question is, how can you be a social justice fighter, or how can you be an activist in a way that's constructive?
Yeah. So before we get to what you're doing in that regard, I'd love to just follow your trajectory a little bit more, because I understand that, having attained all this financial success, you found that it wasn't too gratifying in some level, right? I understand, most people accumulate wealth and then want to buy many, material possessions and have real estate and yachts. And you were known as the homeless billionaire, traveling around, always living in hotels. Like, what was what realizations did you have about what you could and couldn't do with this, in this kind of jet set world of having a lot of money? In what ways was it what it's cracked up to be? In what ways was it disillusioning? In what ways what made you realize eventually that you'd had enough and it was time to do new things?
Well, as I said, I sort of felt that the game I was involved in, which was the game of investments, really is a game, and that's all it is. But if you begin to equate that with happiness or a way of life, then you're confusing things. And if you're going to be good at playing chess or good at playing any game, you have to realize the game is a game. Your life is different. It's not the game. Maybe you're very close to it, but it shouldn't overwhelm you. It's you and the game. And so even though I may have been successful financially, that shouldn't mean that I've got to live in a certain way. And frankly, I felt that a lot of the things that come with financial success, which are material goods or so, were more of actually a burden, a responsibility, as opposed to the opposite. Freedom that comes with financial strength is nice, up to a level. After a certain level, it actually becomes a responsibility and a burden. So the opposite of freedom. You become a slave to what you've created. You actually become a slave to the material goods, including money, as opposed to being, its master.
Yeah.
So I felt it could reverse.
I have a friend who had similar trajectory to yours, and what he said that what happens when you're in that world and in that game is also just that the dynamic that is most salient in your interactions is all about domination, and that he found himself always like thinking in terms of dominating others, even in the most basic human level, and that he found that so kind of soul destroying after a while that he had to leave it as well. Obviously not everybody comes to the same conclusions as you. Like, do you think people who get just kind of caught up in it and are not able to take this outside, more philosophical perspective on it, that it's bad for their spirits in a way? Like I've often joked that we should maybe have fight for more equality in financial equality, also to help the people who have more, because like they seem so unhappy a lot of the time. It seems like once you're defined by your wealth, once you start seeing everybody as possibly there to take advantage of it in some way, it's almost seems like as unhealthy for the people who have it as it is for the people who don't. Like the system itself is just not good for the soul, for lack of a better word.
I think no question. I go back to the analogy of the game. You become possessed by the game. You're in the game. You can't get out. And so your entire life is about the game, winning, and so your life becomes pretty narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And life is way beyond just a game. And here you are in a game that you think you're defined by, but that's not you. Now, there are positive aspects to this because so many people participate in this game, and because it's part of a system, and it's been quite productive. It's enabled a lot of development. It's enabled for a lot of, frankly, economic empowerment way beyond the people who are skillful at the game. So it's been a benefit, I think, to society. So the collateral that so many people involved in this game means that it's created a lot of good and a lot of ungood also for people. But over time, I think it's been beneficial. But for the participants themselves, as you say, many of the participants become prisoners, or this is their life. And I think it's limited.
Was there something that happened in your life that made you have that realization, or was it there all along? Did you have a plan to leave and start the institute like early on, or was there kind of a aha moment or something that happened, some instigating event that made you think like, I can't do this anymore?
Well, I think it happened sort of gradually. There was not a big plan, and I think I'd be a lot prouder if I had, a big grand plan and I got to it. No, I think that after a while I became, frankly, less interested in the game, and got back to what I was really passionate about, which is philosophy and politics. So I give a lot of credit to spending time in Los Angeles, which is more open in every way possible, physical and mental. And I spent time with some professors at UCLA and USC, philosophy and politics. I learned from them, and I got back into this, and it gave me, frankly, more satisfaction, more, and things came out of that, including the institute. So I don't think there was any grand plan. I also, after the 2008 financial crisis, saw how obviously things are so relative and potentially so arbitrary, and the system obviously is much bigger than you, and things can be here one day and they can be gone another day. So it's a good lesson. Don't be attached to things because they're beyond you. The things you should be attached to are things that emotionally really matter, which are obviously relationships, but also the things you care about. These are the things you think about, the things that you can have an interaction with on a daily basis. That's why people are so interested in sort of occupations or in beauty, because those things are things you can touch and you can be in relation with. So anything that's relational is wonderful. I think that when you're involved in things like a financial game, they become actually quite abstract.
Yeah. And what do you think of, so then you found yourself in the position to be able to allocate resources in a way that corresponded to your passions in philosophy and politics. There's a beauty to that, and the effectiveness of one individual being able to like follow their passion and in allocating resources in this way versus the kind of weighty and slow and ineffective use of like government money, let's say. But there's also seems to be a certain like arbitrariness to it. Like I saw a kind of sarcastic tweet the other day that said, free speech is so important. I hope that Elon Musk will give it back to us now by buying Twitter. And it seemed like, there's this kind of, on the one hand, it's beautiful that somebody can follow their passion and follow, whether it's open philanthropy, effective altruism, of then the giving pledge and all of these things that there seems to be an effectiveness to just being able to say, okay, this is what we want to do, this is what we're going to prioritize. But there's also seems to be fragile to be at the whims of a few individuals and what their passions happen to be. You happen to have great roots in something that's interesting and meaningful, but someone else could end up having been just as good at the game and have very, much more arbitrary or frivolous ends. And so, systematically, is it sustainable to have kind of private wealth affecting change versus like government doing it, or larger institutions that have more participants in it, let's say? And did this question kind of occur to you as you're trying to form the institute?
So I think that it's definitely a big risk that individuals have an enormous amount of power and effect, including indirect consequences on our lives, especially in the West, especially in sort of capitalistic environments, which are pretty much everywhere. And the question is, where are we? And I think maybe 50 years ago, there was much more power with politicians, governments, institutions, media, artists, philosophers, public intellectuals. And I think today, things have shifted. Depends on the country, but especially in the US, things have shifted where real power today is actually with the private sector, much more than with government. I mean, look at the contrast between, let's say, China and the US. In China, Xi Jinping was able to shut up Jack Ma, Alibaba, and here, the opposite, social media was able to shut up Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So the president. So you've got, an environment where, let's say, private enterprise, in this case, a narrow set of what's private enterprise, mostly around new technologies, has incredible power today. And it's exciting, but also very dangerous, because, as you say, some of these people have good ideas and some may not have good ideas. And I think we are always, one way or another, in the hands of a few individuals and their ideas. That's why I go back to ideas are very important. The context is very important, because society at the end will reflect and embody really the ideas of a few people, almost like vessels. So it's not like the people shape people or shape society entirely. It's also that society wants to be shaped by them. It's a two-way street. So we've got to think of that. So we're in a very interesting environment today, especially in the US, where there's less trust in sort of a grand design or the state. And everybody's looking for answers around individuals, which makes it much harder for society to come together and for people to build a future and to believe in what a future might really be. So we're much more at the mercy of a few individuals. It's the state we're in, and it's an unusual state.
And I kind of want to keep pressing. Do you find that you are in this position because I'm very curious, like psychologically, whether you find it luck, or is it a responsibility that's been given to you because of, how can I put this? I'm very curious philosophically about, like contingency versus necessity, let's say, and whether you find yourself, oh my God, I happen to be in this position to be able to do all of these things. I better make the best of it. Or are you grateful to the system that gave you this opportunity, and do you find yourself because of that, less likely to want to kind of upset it too much? Or, because I feel like that might be the risk of playing the game for a long time, is that then you end up consciously or unconsciously thinking that must be great, the system who's like given you such a leg up on things. You know what I mean? Like,
well, so there's no question. I've been lucky in 1,000 ways. Then the question is, what do you do with your luck?
Right.
Going back to, a game, it's like you have a set of cards that were given to you at the beginning. What do you do with that set of cards? And things are very dynamic. So it's not, so you get a set of cards, let's say they're good cards, and I was lucky, I got good cards. Then you play the game. And during the game, you're going to get lucky or unlucky. Other players will be good, not good. You will be good, not good. So it's a very dynamic environment. And therefore, you start with something, you are lucky, and then the real question is, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
And in my case, being in the game, you're corrupted by the game, there's no question. And to take some distance and to take independence from it becomes harder and harder. But at some point, that's also, if you're lucky and maybe a little bit courageous, you take the attitude that, yes, you should, take some distance, go outside and see if there's more you can do than just play the game. And in my case, that's where I'm at. It's just, my life journey. There's no question that I've benefited from the game. And therefore, do I want to destroy the game? No. Am I corrupted by the game? To some extent.
Do you think there should be billionaires, I guess is what I'm asking in a nutshell? Like, is it a net positive for the world to have a few people controlling a disproportionate amount of wealth in that way? Being in that position yourself, I'm very just curious if, like, do you think there's enough people like you to, like, be a net positive to the world? Or is the system that gives rise to that possibility just too corrupt?
I think it's a byproduct of the system. So the question is, how do you change the system? How do you make the system such that that byproduct doesn't exist? But it's just a byproduct. And I think that it's byproduct that exists today. There were other byproducts, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. But capitalism empowers certain individuals more than others, and benefits some individuals more than others. At the same time, it does allow a lot of people to participate in the economic development. Is it perfect? Definitely not. Does it need to be tweaked? Yes. Should the expression be simply, money? I think it's limited, and I think we can do better. And I think that potentially we will do better. Today, the reward is too connected to money. The reward in the past was connected a little bit more to things like knowledge or prestige. These things are less important these days. Money has become maybe too prominent. So yes, the system needs to be fine-tuned, recalibrated, changed, and there may be updates, or there may be, in theory, different systems. We're not there yet. So today, do you say, all right, we're going to sort of punish or eliminate certain symptoms of the system, and that's going to resolve the issue with the system? I don't think so. So even though if billionaires are a symptom of what the system produces, well, it's just a symptom. If you want to really make a change, you've got to look at the system. It's like anything good or bad. The symptoms themselves are not the system itself.
And can we talk a little bit about what we're doing tomorrow night and how you're helping philosophers and by giving a prize, right, which is a financial prize, but also obviously by uplifting their work. Let's just step into the current moment for a moment and see, and tell me a little bit about what led up to this right now that's happening tomorrow. Why? As we were asking right before we started, are there enough philosophers out there that deserve this type of reward that can actually help the world in a way that's meaningful? And can you just talk a little bit about what led to this moment?
Well, going back to what we started, as you say, I sort of feel that philosophy can help us in many ways. And philosophy in a broad sense, meaning it can include religion, it can include sort of thinking, even cultural thinking, so not strictly, academic philosophy, so philosophy in a broad sense, as, thinking about life and how to live and how to be as a person, with regards to others and oneself. So I just feel that in an environment that's culturally and politically so fractured and fracturing, and an environment where technologies are empowering us as humans, but also individuals more and more, and frankly the technological agents themselves, AIs are agents and are going to become more and more powerful agents themselves. Philosophy, and having a philosophy for the technologies, a philosophy for how we deal with each other, how we deal with opposing cultures, opposing ideologies, is incredibly important. And I've always felt that way from the beginning, still feel that way. And if we think about who we are today, we're still shaped by thinkers that existed thousands of years ago. So in the West, we're still shaped by Socrates and Jesus Christ and philosophers like Sartre or Nietzsche or Marx. And in the East, Lao Tzu, Confucius and others have shaped, or the Buddha have shaped the lives and the thinking of other cultures. So these people are still the people who have more influence than anything else in terms of how we think and how we live. And our wisdom is probably not that different than the wisdom that was shaped then. So to me, going back to the kinds of questions that have made our cultures is key. And we continue to, I hope, evolve our thinking and our cultures, and having wisdom for our technologies, who we are, what we can do, I think is essential. So my feeling is that trying to give dignity and giving value the same way as, let's say, a Nobel Prize gives value to economics or peace or literature, should be done for philosophy, because philosophy is really the the world of who we are, the world of the idea of who we are. And that's why we created this philosophy prize. We started it 6 years ago, and the idea is to elevate philosophy and to reward, in this case, through a prize, which is a very mercantile way of expressing respect, but it seems to be an effective one, hopefully. If we can elevate philosophy the same way as other disciplines are valued. I felt it's at least a signal, a personal signal, but also a signal that ideas have value and are important.
And who's getting the prize tomorrow?
So Peter Singer, who's an Australian philosopher who thinks a lot about empowering people, about the humanity of our actions and what our actions mean. But he goes beyond humans. He is very interested also in the respect we should give, at least in his mind, to other species, including animals. So he has a very broad sense of what constitutes agents that are worth respect.
And looking forward in the next 5-10 years of what you would like to achieve personally and with the Institute? Big picture goals?
Well, the Institute is trying to work on issues that are difficult, like democracy or capitalism or geopolitics, which is mainly the relations between the West and China. And frankly, who are we becoming as humans with technologies that allow us in some ways to play God? So these are the questions we have, and can we contribute to that? Can we come up with good ideas, better ideas? Can we enable them? Because it's not us, it's really enabling others in thinking these things through. Hopefully we help there. I think my own feeling is that we are going through a difficult period, the world is, and but things always go in waves, and we hopefully will come out healthier and stronger on the other side. So if we can contribute in the process of coming up or making or helping answer some of the difficult questions we face today, and a way to shape sort of our future. If we can help in doing that, then that'd be quite wonderful. If we can enable courageous and thinking that contributes to something better and fresh, I'd be very happy.
When I met you, I was very flattered you wanted to see my film Being in the World. That's how we met a few months ago. And the reason I kind of wanted to have this conversation is I saw this kind of youthful curiosity in you. And I find that this is always in the most admirable and successful people I've met. There's never a sense like I already know everything. There's like a genuine desire to continue to learn. And you said to me as we were like after the film, like that you felt like there was still a little bit of that childhood rebel in you, and I've heard you say that you're like a revolutionary still in your heart. Do you find yourself now, do you think that there's room for that kind of more revolutionary way of affecting change? Is it possible, or is it just an ideal? Or do you think that we're much better focused on incremental, gradual change that can be done without upsetting the system too much?
I think you always need a revolution, and I think the spirit of trying to find, the sort of the spirit of being an explorer, the spirit of being sort of in search, I think is what makes us and has helped us discover and given us joys and extraordinary experiences, but no question at a high cost at times. And the cost at times is, yes, we break things, and incremental change is, on average, healthier for most people and for society. But to really advance, you have to sometimes, make some changes that are uncomfortable. And unless doesn't mean you want to implement and only live that way. Definitely not. But at times you've got to be courageous. You've got to come up with things that are really change, because change is really life, and change is the only way we create a future. And by not changing, we will die. By changing, we might have a better future, or a future at all.
And if, let's say, there's this last question maybe. I think it's still going. Let me make sure.
Did I do something?
No, it just rests a second, but it still records underneath. I think we're okay. Yeah, it's still recording.
Okay.
There's
I thought your monitor didn't like us anymore.
There's a lot of, I think, righteous indignation, to put it mildly, about the kind of greater and greater inequality that exists in our culture. There's, the gap in wealth is getting bigger and bigger. I can imagine things getting to a point where people are just not okay with it anymore at all. Would you be on the side of the revolutionaries who decided that it was the whole system's got to be undone and maybe start from scratch? Or do you worry at all that might be like the anger from underneath might bubble up to such a point that's going to be like not that people will no longer be okay with incremental change?
Well, that I think is a very good question. And going back to revolutions and change, I think that what happens, unfortunately, is that sometimes things get to a point where they need to change, and you do get a revolution. But normally, what happens during the revolution doesn't create the right change. The revolution very often is just a revolution,
right,
breaking the old,
right,
but it very often doesn't have solutions, and people do suffer. So the revolutions themselves are quite toxic. You also need a solution. You also need ideas. And in that sense, that's what we're working on. So just breaking things for the sake of it doesn't help anyone. Very often you need to break things to get somewhere new, but you also want to get somewhere new. And we're focusing not on the breaking, but on the what could the new look like. And economics is only one aspect to where we are. It's an expression of where we are, but it's not the only expression.
Very good. I think that's a really nice place to stop. And that's, I think...
Well, very good questions. I can't, and I like that you pushed it a little.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for this.
Ciao. Grazie.
Yes, I think we can stop that.